Hello, welcome to this lesson on specialization. First, we're going to look at absolute advantage. This is when you can produce more than somebody else. And then we're also going to look at comparative advantage. This is when you can produce at a lower opportunity cost than somebody else. Here we have the USA and Australia, and we're looking at the production of cars and shoes. You can see how many cars and shoes each country produces right there. Now, first, we're going to look at outputs. This is an output problem because we're looking at what is produced. In this case, the production of cars and shoes. So this question is telling us about outputs. The absolute advantage here is going to be who can produce the most. So the USA can produce 50 cars, Australia can produce 40. So the USA has the absolute advantage in cars. And the USA can produce 100 shoes and Australia can produce 50. So the USA has an absolute advantage in shoes. Next up, we're going to look at comparative advantage. To get the comparative advantage, we have to first calculate the per unit opportunity cost. This is how much you are losing from producing one item of another good. Now, to get the per unit opportunity cost, if we're looking at outputs or production, we get the opportunity cost or the item that we're not producing divided by the item we are producing. So this is the formula if we are looking at outputs for per unit opportunity cost. So let's calculate it. If the USA is producing cars, that means they're not producing shoes. So that'll be 100 divided by 50 right there. That means that each car that they produce is going to cost them two shoes. On the other hand, if the US produces shoes, then they are not producing cars. So there will be 50 divided by 100, which means one shoe is going to cost the USA half of a car produced. We can also look at that for Australia. So if Australia is making cars, that means they're not making shoes. So that's 50 over 40. That means that every time Australia makes one car, they are losing out on producing 1.25 shoes. And when Australia produces shoes, that means they're not producing cars. So that will be 40 divided by 50. That means that every time that Australia produces one shoe, they are losing out on the opportunity to produce 4/5 of a car. Now that we have our per unit opportunity cost calculations done, we are just going to look at who has the lowest opportunity cost in that category. So in producing cars, Australia has a lower opportunity cost, and in producing shoes, the USA has a lower opportunity cost because one half is less than 4/5, which means Australia has the comparative advantage in producing cars, and the USA has the comparative advantage in producing shoes. If there are comparative advantages, like we see here, then there's an incentive to trade because you can produce the stuff you're good at producing and then get the other things from somebody else at a lower cost than if you were to make them yourself. So when there's an incentive to trade, countries trade with each other and they're both going to benefit from the trade because they both get lower total costs than if they were to produce everything themselves. So here, since we know that the USA has a comparative advantage in producing shoes, they're the ones that are going to produce the shoes. They're going to specialize in making only shoes, and they're going to export it. And how are they going to get the cars? Well, they're going to import it from the other country. So they're going to import the cars. Now, when you're importing, you want to pay as low a cost as possible. Okay. Australia has the comparative advantage in producing cars, so they're going to specialize and produce only cars, and then they're going to export the cars, which means they're going to end up importing the shoes. And again, if you're importing it, you want to pay as low a cost as possible, right there. So, what negotiation is going to benefit both countries? Well, if we're looking at cars, you want it both countries want there to be a negotiation between these numbers of 2 and 1.25. So a terms of trade of one car for 1.5 shoes is in between these countries per unit opportunity costs. So that's going to benefit both countries. If Australia had more than 1.25, they would be happy with that. So that number's in between there, so they're good. And if the US gets a number less than two shoes, they're also happy with that because they're importing it. They want a low cost as possible. So since we're picking a number in between both of them, it benefits both of those nations. So we got one car for 1.5 shoes would benefit both of them. And if we're looking here at the production of shoes, then we can see that any number between one half of a car and four-fifths of a car would benefit both of them. Here, since the Australia is importing it, they want a number that's less than four-fifths of a car. And the US would want a number more than one half. So any number in between those, let's say three-fifths, would work for both countries. Now, if we had a terms of trade of one shoe for five cars, well, Australia doesn't want to pay that much because they're importing it, so they would not agree to that. If we had one shoe for one fifth of a car, then the US doesn't want to agree to that. So it has to be a number between both of these to be a good terms of trade for both countries. Let's see what happens when they trade with each other. So here we have the production possibilities curves for both the USA and Australia. And this is how they look like before trade. This is how much Australia is able to produce by itself, and the USA, if they just focus on one item at a time. Now, if the USA trades, they're going to get more cars from Australia. So the production possibilities curve is going to shift rightwards from the car standpoint because now, since they're able to get cars at a lower cost, since they're getting them from Australia, they're going to be able to have more total cars. Here, Australia is getting more shoes from the US, so now the production possibilities curve will shift to the right towards having more shoes because, again, they're able to get them at a lower cost from the United States than if they did them themselves, so they're going to have more total shoes. So, focusing on producing the item for which you have the comparative advantage is called specialization. You're just focusing on that one item since you have the lowest per unit opportunity cost for it. This allows you to produce more of the products that you have the comparative advantage in and trade for the products which you do not have the comparative advantage in. So specialization and trade allow you to get more stuff because now you're getting it at a lower cost from somebody else. That increases your production possibilities because people are trading and specializing in what they're good at making. They can produce more, so increase in production possibilities. And since you're able to produce more, this is going to lead to more economic growth in the future. Okay, here we're looking at a different problem. Here we have the hours needed to make TVs and the hours needed to make flags. So now you're not looking at how much they're producing, you're looking at the resources needed to produce these items. And these are called inputs. Inputs are what you need to produce things. And since this question is talking about those resources, these hours needed to make those things, this is a question about inputs. Now you want to take less hours to produce something than more hours to produce something. So whoever has the lowest resources that are used has the absolute advantage here. So the USA can make it in 5 hours, so they have the absolute advantage in making TVs instead of Canada. And with flags, the USA can make it in 2 hours, so they have the absolute advantage in making flags. That's going to tell us the absolute advantage, but now we also got to look at the comparative advantage. In order to get the comparative advantage, first we have to calculate the per unit opportunity cost. And this is, again, how much you are losing from producing one item of another good. Now, if we're looking at inputs, we have a little bit of a different equation for this. It's going to be the resources used to produce the item that we're thinking about producing divided by the resources that we would use to produce the other item that we're not making, the opportunity cost. So we're going to use this formula if we're looking at inputs. So here, if the US makes TVs, then the resources needed to make TVs are 5 divided by the resources needed to make the other item, which is 2 hours. So that's 5 divided by 2. That means that every time the US makes one TV, they're losing out on producing 2.5 flags. And if they're making flags, then that number goes on top. The one they're not making, which is TVs, goes at the bottom. So each time they produce one flag, that's going to cost them 0.4 of a TV. For Canada, if they're making TVs, that number goes on top, and if since they're not making flags, that goes at the bottom, which means that one TV is going to cost them 2.5 flags. And if they're making flags, the four goes on top, and the TVs which they're not making goes at the bottom. So one flag is going to cost them zero point 0.4 of that TV. Here we have a very interesting scenario where the per unit opportunity costs for both countries in making TVs are the same. And same thing for making flags. The per unit opportunity costs for making flags are both the same. So neither country has a comparative advantage in neither of the goods. What happens if neither country has the comparative advantage? Then there are no incentives to trade. Since you're going to get it for the same cost from somebody else, might as well make it yourself. Specialization and trade only happen if both parties benefit, which means they get it at a lower cost than if they were to produce it themselves. But since here they're not doing that, there's no incentive to trade. That's all for this lesson. See you next time.